I was in Kyiv a couple of weeks ago and interviewed Zelensky in his bunker, or sort of palace-turned bunker, sandbags in the windows. Very impressive guy, I've got to say. I mean, he's short, but my God, is he impressive. Looks you straight in the eye, firm handshake. He's a real hombre. He's a good hombre, as Trump would put it. And he said, he more or less said, I don't get it with you guys. You've got a bargain here. We are sacrificing our men and our women for a cause that you fundamentally believe in, which is the cause of liberal democracy in Europe. And all you need to do is send us some weapons.
Now, the Foreign Secretary, David Cameron, is with NATO foreign ministers in Brussels today to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the alliance. They've also agreed to start planning for a greater role in coordinating military aid to Ukraine. But with the possibility of a second term for Donald Trump looming on the horizon, is the alliance future-proof and fit for purpose? Manveen, looking at the pictures from Brussels, it's sort of difficult to sort of escape the conclusion that this might be the last meeting for NATO as we know it if Donald Trump gets in and changes the structure, or indeed pulls America out.
Yeah, they're going out with a bang. To be fair to him, in his comments about it so far, Donald Trump has said that he wouldn't pull out of NATO as long as the other partners pull their weight. As little as I agree with most things that Donald Trump says, there is something in that. For years now, I think the problem with NATO has been that America has been such a big force in it, and everyone has been so dependent on America, being the main player, that actually everyone's got away with spending less and less on defence. I mean, we have spent less on defence. It's ironic, if you look at sort of defence spending in this country, it was so high in the 80s when the threat of the Cold War loomed, and now that that Cold War has heated up quite a bit and Russia really is a threat, we're spending far less now than we were back then. And that's not even taking into account inflation. We've all sort of smudged the lines a bit. So 2%, we say we're meeting the 2% target of spending 2% of GDP on defence, but increasingly over the last few years, that's taken in not only the pensions of soldiers, but even the pensions of civilians in the MOD. We're paying pensions for civil servants out of that defence pot. That is not going towards, anything that's going to keep us safe at night should there be a war. And so, I do think the rest of Europe probably does need, the rest of NATO probably does need to do a bit more. But it's terrifying because NATO is probably more needed now than it has been for decades. There really is a genuine threat of Russia looming. If you go to Poland at the moment, places like Krakow, people are selling property because they're really worried that they won't be defended if Russia turns up. I think we're not listening enough to the Baltic states who feel the threat much more, who are, they're throwing everything at defence right now. And I really worry about how all of this changes when Donald Trump comes in and things get worse.
It's really interesting as well. You'd mention the lack of sort of urgency on defence spending. There's an interesting interview with John Healey, who's Labour's Shadow Defence Secretary in this week's New Statesman, where he says actually he's not, Labour talk a good game on defence, but he sort of, when it's put your money where your mouth is time, he said, well, I won't actually push Rachel Reeves to increase that to 2.5% of GDP. It was a very striking and quite alarming comment.
Striking because at the moment I think public opinion wouldn't mind more being spent on defence. I think people genuinely see that the world is more insecure than it has been in years, and they want to feel like we're going to be protected, particularly if Trump gets in and there's no guarantee that America will turn up to save us.
Matt, NATO, fit for purpose?
It's so funny. Absolutely fit for purpose, and needs to be fit for purpose, and has found its spine again, thanks to Vladimir Putin of Russia. It's so ironic, not quite funny, but ironic, that just before the Russia invasion, it was President Emmanuel Macron of France who said that NATO is brain dead.
Brain dead, yeah.
Do you remember he said that?
Yeah.
And then a few months later, Ukraine was invaded by Russia. NATO stepped up to the plate. Okay, Trump was a complicating factor before that because he said, you guys aren't paying enough money, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. And as Manveen said, that's a fair point. And actually, I'm not sure that Trump wants to destroy NATO for his friend Vladimir Putin. I don't buy that. I think what he wants is a good deal. Because for him, it's all transactional. And if you can show to Trump that, we've paid this amount of extra money and, there's a deal to be done here and America's not being taken to the cleaners when they're not being fleeced, I think he'll stay on board, frankly. Also because the arms industry in America will breathe down his neck and say, mate, we're making a lot of money here. Don't deprive us of these dollars. But I think the other interesting thing is that politically, and Macron is very much, in charge here, in the lead, and it's so ironic considering that France didn't even want to join NATO, initially. Politically, the French have realized, perhaps more than anyone else, that Europe needs to stand on its own feet more than it has done so far, because we don't know what's going to happen in America. So that's why he came up with this line about we may have to deploy NATO soldiers on the ground in Ukraine. That was immediately shot down by the Americans and by the Brits, but also especially by the Germans. And we're in this sort of in-between mood, aren't we, Patrick? Because on one hand, we realize that Russia is a very big threat. They've actually invaded a country. They might invade more. Every time Putin opens his mouth and gives a speech, we get cold shivers down our spine in the rest of Europe. But we're not quite ready yet to do what various British defense secretaries and former defense secretaries and generals want us to do, which is to prepare for war, to be in a pre-war state, as Grant Shapps put it. And again, Vladimir Putin could push us there with another big attack on Kyiv, or a couple of very robust and scary speeches. But at some stage in the next year, we're going to have to really make up our mind. What are we prepared to do financially and in other sacrifices in order to basically shore up not just Ukraine, but NATO? And I was in Kyiv a couple of weeks ago and interviewed Zelensky in his bunker, or sort of palace-turned bunker, sandbags in the windows. Very impressive guy, I've got to say. I mean, he's short, but my God, is he impressive. Looks you straight in the eye, firm handshake. He's a real hombre. He's a good hombre, as Trump would put it. And he said, he more or less said, I don't get it with you guys. You've got a bargain here. We are sacrificing our men and our women for a cause that you fundamentally believe in, which is the cause of liberal democracy in Europe. And all you need to do is send us some weapons. And so here, the Americans especially are not sending weapons, or not as many as they should be sending. And you've got boys sitting by their artillery pieces in Donbass with nothing to put in them to fire at the Russians. So they're now looking at further strategic withdrawals in order to save both men and ammunition in the coming weeks. And that is a very sorry state for them to be in. And there will come a point when this salami slicing in the opposite direction goes so far that the Russians will feel suitably emboldened in order to have another go at Kyiv, which I'm absolutely convinced they will do. And that will be a really bad day for not just for NATO, but also obviously for Europe and what's left of the Western alliance. And I think that's the kind of thing that Zelensky wants us to focus on. And then consider finally, briefly, the irony that the reason why these weapons aren't coming from America to the front line in Donbass is not because of a general lack of spine in NATO, or Americans have lost interest in Ukraine. It's because this is yet again part of the American presidential election cycle. Because part of the deal of handing over the weapons to Ukraine is fixing the border issues with illegal migration with Mexico. Now, they can be fixed quite easily, but the Republicans don't want to hand Joe Biden a triumph, which he can use in the election campaign. They would rather see the border go to unravel further, which they can then blame on the administration, and hang Ukraine out to dry, not because they love Vladimir Putin, but because they don't want to hand Joe Biden a domestic victory.
Well, Matt Frei, Manveen Rana, thank you very much for joining us to discuss the biggest issues in the world this morning.